Okay, so Sharon, it's great to be with you. We have both been really interested in this recent iteration of the Inside Out movie, Inside Out 2. And we spoke about it a few months ago, and you mentioned it to me as something I should check out. And I watched it recently with my son and rewatched it again today, and so did you. So I thought we could have a conversation about it because it is I think, a very beautiful and dynamic uh, sort of expression of emotions and the sense of self, and they explore a lot of these different things within the context of Riley, who's a character is 13 years old, just beginning puberty, and I wonder just what's your first general impression of the movie and how it struck you, and let's explore this movie together.
I think it's utterly brilliant. And I'm so grateful that the general public, is being educated about parts,
Hmm.
uh, about the essence, the sense of self, about the shifts that take place in adolescence in terms of identity and the parts that emerge, and then about the importance of all of those parts being brought into a place of harmony. I mean, I just,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so this reminds me of when the first movie came out. I was really happy to see the embodiment or the personification of parts.
Mhm,
This harkens to Virginia Satir's work of Parts
mhm,
Party, where she would physically embody parts, not specifically emotions, but dynamics within people. So, for
mhm,
example, if somebody was really struggling with a part of themselves that could be tyrannical or a dictator, they might represent that person with an Adolf Hitler type character. And then
mhm.
someone would actually dress up in this way. They would
Yes.
interact with other parts, and a person just being able to develop awareness from that embodiment and to visually see and to stand back and look,
Mhm,
incorporating mindfulness as part of
mhm,
how we look, um, was really fascinating. But in this cartoon, it focuses specifically on emotions, and
mhm.
so there's the primary emotions which appear in the first movie:
Yeah.
joy, sadness, fear, disgust, anger. And in this movie, which explores puberty, so Riley, who's the 13-year-old character, the new emotions that emerge are anxiety, inu, which is boredom, and embarrassment, and what's the other one? Um, Anxiety. What's the other one?
I just let's see, envy.
Envy. Yeah, envy
Yeah,
doesn't
and
get too
then
much
there's the
airtime in this
sarcasm
movie.
that kind of comes along, but they don't really show it as a figure. And then there's nostalgia who pops in and then they shove her back out twice.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Nostalgia. I think sarcasm is sort of given to the boredom character because
Oh,
boredom
okay.
has this kind of sass, yeah. And then
Okay.
remember, because the sarcastic character says, "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life," and
Oh,
then
that's true. Yeah.
that's when she delivers his line. So like as we go through this movie, this it's going to be filled with spoilers. So if you haven't watched the movie, pause now and watch it. But and come back to this exploration. But um, yeah, I think that the exploration of emotions, but particularly what stood out to me, and I think what's relevant to um, the podcast that I and the topic that I'm most interested in is related to the self. And in the movie, it explores this sense of self. So um, the architecture of the mind is there's these islands which are like an island of the Goofy Island or the Family Island, the Friendship Island, and these are circuits for constructions of memories or experiences that occur, and then just below that come beliefs.
Right.
So as you go down, it's beliefs. So beliefs could be um, I'm a good hockey player or I'm a good person. And they could be insecure beliefs like I'm not good enough. And so these beliefs form the sense of self, which I think is a good description of a sense of self. Sense of self is um, a general sense of beliefs and attitudes that we have towards ourselves. Is there anything about that architecture that we see in the movie that you want to comment on that you feel is, you know, either accurate or inaccurate or congruent with your experience with people?
No, I think it is congruent, and I think that the real clear banishment or exiling of those disliked, you know, uncomfortable when they decide they don't want those parts, that they make a clear separation and try to hide them, put them in a bottle. We do that
Mm,
unconsciously,
yeah, yeah.
but they made it real clear that putting things into the unconscious is part of the process.
Yeah, that's one of the things that struck me. So at the beginning of the movie, you see Joy when there's a negative experience, something awkward, like, you know, they talk about forgetting somebody's name. That memory will like this his memory is encapsulated in this ball, and
Mhm.
the main character Joy, she'll shoot it into this vault and shoot it to the back of Riley's mind, and it ends up in this stockpile, this kind of garbage chute of memories. And it's like we don't need that, or that's not fitting with what
Yep.
we how we want to think about ourselves. And that there's a moment, the other main character of this movie is anxiety.
Mhm.
Anxiety becomes the antagonist, I guess, to Joy. And um you know, I don't know if there's a gender that you could associate to that character, but um anxiety really um, is aimed at control. It's they're very concerned with being able to control the outcome of what happens in Riley's life. So in the context of the movie, it's her performance as a hockey player. And the more goals that she scores, the more that she's going to be liked. And so that becomes a budding belief. If I'm good at hockey, people will like me. If I'm good at hockey, if I score more goals, I'm going to be accepted into this group and I'm not going to be alone.
Mhm.
And so I think there's this pivotal moment in the movie where there's a parallel where Joy says, we can't control who Riley becomes.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that this is what Joy says to anxiety, but then anxiety basically moments later repeats the exact same thing and says to Joy, we can't control who Riley becomes. And then you flash back to these moments where Joy is in a similar way, in a parallel way, trying to control the memories and by
Mhm.
shooting them back.
Mm.
So
Yes.
I wonder what you make of that comment about controlling who she becomes. What did you make of that depiction, and what did that mean to you?
Mm. I think of it all as an attempt to protect, to protect from the pain, or to protect from the conflict between the new parts that are coming and the old parts.
Hmm.
And the anxiety would try to protect by projecting, right? If we project all these horrible things that are going to happen, it'll help protect us. Um, and then the beauty for me, this may be jumping ahead, but is the essence of what Richard Schwartz would say is there's no bad parts, that there is within that anxiety, and that's what begins to emerge. It's not only that she can plan, but that she can be there with a protective energy that's not controlling, but it's important, that it's
Yes,
honored
yeah.
as part of the team, if you will.
Yes. And all the energies that are introduced through puberty, embarrassment, envy, anxiety, they developmentally are accurate because they have to do with developmental tasks of a 12-year-old, 13-year-old,
Yes.
which is future planning, perspective taking, theory of
Mhm.
mind. These are actual cognitive developmental stages
Yes.
that are occurring at that time. And I think to have them depicted in that way, so their cognitive skills that are coming online in a richer way, in a more
Mhm.
sophisticated way, that then
Mhm.
need to be balanced with these other primary emotions and
Mhm.
needs, the need for connection, the need for joy, for happiness, for play. Um, so I think that seeing these parts interact in this way and how they negotiate one another, I think is really
Mhm.
accurate to the experience. Now, what happens in the movie is anxiety um, basically commandeers the
Yes,
console or the control area,
yes.
and she casts away the initial primary emotions, the initial team of emotions,
Mhm.
and she discards the sense of self. So the
Mm.
sense of self gets shooted where Joy was shooting all those memories that
Right.
didn't fit with what she wanted to be. The sense of self gets shot. I wonder what you made of that depiction and what you thought of that.
It's very interesting because for many years working with self and parts, the way I've tried to explain to people, is it's like the self might be standing on stage uh, conducting the whole process of leading your being, and then all of a sudden somebody walks up that reminds you of something terrible and you get very reactive. And I said, it's like somebody comes from the left side of the stage and just shoves the self back and goes, oh no, this is survival time. Forget it. I'm out front. And I kept thinking about that, when anxiety says, oh no, self, you're off of here. We have to control the situation, and gets more and
Mm,
more chaotic. The way she goes with that the console was like, she's just
yeah,
completely
yeah,
out of control, but it
right.
really was a very similar, in my mind, image to what came to me years ago about how a part can just pop in and just shove the self back because it believes, even though it's usually young, no, no, no,
Hmm.
we have to be in charge here or you're not going to survive.
Right. The part can take over, and
Exactly.
it's from a survival stance or survival energy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that anxiety said specifically was we need to create a new self.
Yes.
And um and I think one of the things that I found very, very useful is um and this gets into something that we were talking about before we started recording, which was I've come to believe that there's a self that transcends a sense of self. And so
Yes.
one of the things that I think has been really helpful is differentiating self,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the ground of being or
Mm-hmm.
somehow part of the divine spark within us that
Mm-hmm.
maybe precedes our birth and transcends our life.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a self that is inherently worthy
Mm-hmm.
and formless. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of self. It can be kind of confusing because we're using the same word. Virginia Satir talked a lot about self-esteem, but in the movie, I think that the thing that's created through beliefs, that's created from memory, that's created through experience, is the sense of self. And I think psychologically, it's good to have a stable sense of self, but
Mm-hmm.
inevitably, that sense of self goes through chaos as you go through puberty because
Right.
of all of the changes that are occurring
Right.
physically and socially and intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
So this sense of self goes through this chaos period because it's transforming. And so I think that's a healthy transition that we all go through and really should go through as we are um, developing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain things that get in the way from us going through that period and
Mm-hmm.
transforming on the other side. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think I think having a connection to an essential self, being self-connected in a way where we can tolerate transformations of our concepts of self is
Mhm.
really important,
Hmm.
um, because it it allows us to differentiate that there's the energy, the process by which we change, and
Mhm.
then there's the form that takes place at point A, and then
Mhm.
the difference that occurs at point B. Um, but you see, I think that the characters, all the characters are very attached to the sense of self. And so they're running around, they're very like it has to be this certain way. Um, but I think in recognizing that the sense of self necessarily needs to change, and it's a creative process, I think makes it less um, less frightening that the sense of self is going to change.
Mhm.
And
I
so,
really
anyways,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
and I wonder what you make of that distinction that I'm trying to make. I don't quite have it perfected yet, but I think that that's something I was really curious
yes.
about with the movie because I don't think the movie necessarily gets to that depth because I think it's focused on the material, the content of the mind,
Mhm.
what's going on in the mind.
Mhm.
But I think that the I think the energy that kind of runs through it, which is there's a necessity of integrating the parts.
Mhm.
There's a movement of change that needs and transformation that needs to occur.
Yeah.
And I think that flow is this energy of the self. You could call it life energy, you could call
Yes.
it the self, but I think connecting to that and having, I don't know if it's faith in that or a connection to that or trust in that, I think is really important in order to um, become psychologically resilient. Um,
You know, there's a scene right near the end that to me just was so exemplifying that when she starts to flow skating,
yes,
just
yes,
she's flowing. In my mind,
yes,
that's that self energy. And I really like what you're saying in
mm,
terms of distinguishing that from a sense of self. Because I think when you get to that level, it's the spirit, it's not cognitive, it's not anything that says I am worthy, you just know it. And
yeah,
it's the spirit, and that
yeah,
life energy, it is also, I think what you're articulating so beautifully is what's driving the whole evolution of
yeah,
her integration.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a transition in that moment in the movie where she connects to her breath,
Mhm. Yes,
and
yes,
um, and I can't quite remember exactly what's happening in terms of the characters, but um, her friends, like, I think anxiety is removed from the console, and then the characters all start to come together and they hug.
yeah,
And so it's this energy of what connection, love.
yes,
And then Riley starts to breathe and then she looks up and then she sees the sun shining through the windows in the hockey arena.
yes,
And then there's a sense of peace that comes through that. And I think that is the connection to, connection to life that's not necessarily embodied or
yes.
limited by my body, but it's somehow transcends. It's kind of all around us.
Exactly.
And um, and so I think that visual depiction of her looking up, I think that's, you know, when we get out of survival energy and out of something like depression or anxiety, we look up, we're connected
Mhm.
to people, we're connected to nature, we're
Mhm.
transcending, we're looking up
Yes,
and we're moving upwards. And
yes.
that's the self-connection that makes the creation and recreation and transformation of the sense of self possible.
Mhm.
And because in that moment she's able to confess to her friends that what she's been hiding, her friends are going to a different school
I,
and she's really hurt by this, but she's been
yep,
pretending or acting like
yep,
it's fine. And
yep,
she just finally starts to cry and she says, I'm so sorry, I've been mean to you. I've been really hurt and upset, and I'm so sorry that I've been treating you so badly. I hope you could forgive me. She confesses, she lets it all out.
yep,
And I think that truth telling is a transformational process as well.
right.
And I think the other thing in terms of relationship to emotion and and what I want to draw together is two things. I think if we can start to believe and experience this self connection that transcends emotion, sense of self, beliefs, then we hold that material or that content lightly, because I think that our initial reactions to, I think what's quite natural is our initial reactions to negative emotion is denial or rejection or
Yep,
projection
yep,
or whatever defensiveness. So joy shows that when there's a negative, awkward experience, those memories get shot back to the back of your head. I don't want to think about it. Just don't think about
right,
it. Just don't think about it.
right.
And anxiety, vying for control is the primary thing. Any other perspectives are reacted to with defensiveness, fight, a reaction of like, I'm going to put you in a bottle, I'm going to bottle you up, and I'm going to suppress you.
Mhm,
Um, and so I thought about that in terms of what are the primordial reactions we have in
mhm,
our mind to emotions, and that's fight, flight, and freeze. And
yep,
so you could see those reactions in that kind of way. So I think that that's another thing that the movie does a great job of depicting in it. I think it's worth sort of highlighting um, in terms of processing that movie or thinking about it psychologically, to watch the ways. One, I think it's to accept that when we have a negative experience, it's going to be quite natural to react and to say, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look about it. I don't want to talk.
mhm,
Um, I hate this experience. That those are going to be natural reactions. And I think when we can receive that support and that love and that connection, eventually it's going to be a healthy thing to come and to see those emotions and to apprehend them and to be
mhm,
present to them and to allow them to transform in the direction that they need to.
mhm,
But I think having compassion for the initial reaction and then eventually over time opening up to a different response, which I think is only possible through something like self connection, which is I'm not what I feel. I'm not
mhm,
what I am experiencing at a moment in time.
mhm,
Um, those experiences that lead to beliefs, and what we see with Riley is when she's struggling with the hockey, this
yep,
powerful belief comes out and she's repeating it again and again, which is I'm not good enough.
right.
Right? I'm not good enough. So a belief like that, when that gets into being a sense of self, can be disconnecting to life and connecting to a sense of self connection. Um, so, anyways, I wonder what you think about that. Yeah.
One thing you said very quickly that I'd like to underline is when we have something that we're not happy with the way we're feeling, and we, you know, try to deny it, or oftentimes say, just stop thinking about it, stop thinking about it, or don't go there. You
Yeah.
use the word compassion, and that's the key. It's not easy, but to make that shift out of that place of scolding or denial into a place of compassion, because then you're in what I believe is the self energy,
Hmm.
which can
Yeah.
then help you with the part that immediately begins to differentiate out the part, and you can begin to have a relationship of comfort to the part that's
Yeah.
hurting. Otherwise,
Yeah.
again, you're either putting the, like Riley does, having to put it on the back of your mind and take all kinds of energy to keep it there, or it's up front and acting out on you in some way.
Yeah. 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 I think what we're talking about takes a lot of experience and practice, because essentially it's something like I'm afraid
Mhm.
and I'm afraid of my fear and I don't
Yeah,
want to look at it.
yeah.
I think if you can get to a place of self-connection, which is I know I'm worthy and I know I'm loved, and maybe
Mhm.
that's because I feel trusted and I feel upheld by my parents, then it's I'm afraid and I'm afraid of my fear, but I know I don't need to be afraid of my experience. Even
Mhm.
though I feel afraid, I
Mhm.
can look. I can still look. And it's trusting that I can look and I'll be okay even when I look at difficult experiences. And I think that that's what we see happen with Riley at the end, which is everything that she's been afraid to say, she eventually says to her friends, and
Yes.
that's the best thing for her. and for her
Yes.
relationships, which is just to be
Yes.
honest about what she's feeling
Yes.
and to trust that her friends will hold her and they literally hug,
Mhm.
that she will be held in that space of
Mhm.
I accept your emotions and your emotions are okay because they're just part of life.
Right.
Um, and we don't need to draw conclusions like you're not
Mhm.
a bad person. And
Mhm.
so I thought that that was a beautiful aspect of it. So you see that again and again. You see that with the inner parts hugging, coming
Yes.
together, integrating, and you see that with the friends. You see that interpersonally as well. So
Yes.
I think that's a nice depiction of um, what we would call systems dynamic and the importance of
I
integrating pieces
watched
together.
Virginia Satir do a parts party. She did exactly what they did in the movie, which was after she had had the self interact, the adult self interact with each of the parts and come to a place of harmony and realization that they may have had an extreme behavior going on, but what was underneath was a positive intention. She had the person stand in the middle, and each part, like you mentioned, the Hitler part or the Mother Teresa part or whatever,
Mm,
she would ask them to come, address the person, and say, I am your Hitler part. I resent, or let's say Richard Nixon. That was one of them I remember. I am your Richard Nixon part. What you have said to me originally was that I represent dishonesty, and you hate dishonesty. But I now realize that there are times that I need to be dishonest. If I needed to protect my family, if there was a burglar coming in the door,
mhm.
whatever it is, I need you to be a part of me. And I now invite you in. And then she would have the person put their hands. So by the time all the parts had been brought in, then she would have the person close their eyes. There would be this physical kinesthetic sensation of all the parts
Mm,
being taken into her body, their
yeah,
body. And it was
yeah,
powerful.
beautiful. Yeah, yeah.
And to see that in a movie, I went, oh my God.
Yeah. So
Same thing.
what's the part what part of the movie
It's right near the
is it
end. It's right near
yeah.
the end. All the parts surround her and they're just like embracing her. And I think there's a line I wrote down near the end. It says, every bit of Riley makes her who she is.
Mm, yeah,
So
yeah,
powerful.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's that and that's on the one hand, that's something to believe that all
Mhm.
the parts are part of you and that they have a place. And then there's an experience of that. And then I think after the experience, then there's a belief again, and a different kind of belief or a trust that that's the case.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, I think yeah, in my experience, in my own personal work, and then in my work with people, uh, I definitely have seen that and experienced that and have faith in that. So it's great to see a movie depicting some of these inside outside
Oh my goodness.
dynamics. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
I remember when Richard Schwartz began to say multiplicity of the mind is normal. And in the
Mm-hmm.
field of psychology, psychotherapy, he got so much pushback. No, 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 that's called multiple personality disorder. That's a disorder. And
Yeah.
he said,
Yeah.
no, it's normal. There's the self and there are parts. And everybody is on the spectrum. Now, if you've been horrifically abused as a child over a long period of time, those parts may have developed what he called amnestic barriers where they don't know each other, and that
Right.
becomes multiple personality disorder. But
Yeah.
for most of
They're
us,
dissociated. Yeah.
yeah, that's no matter who you are, it's you're somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah.
You've all got parts and you have a self.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just the architecture of the mind and of the psyche. So
Mhm.
um yeah. So what's your hope of how this movie might impact people, and yeah.
The first time I watched it was at Christmas time, and I watched it with my 11-year-old grandson. And at the end, I said, "So, what does this movie say to you?" And he said, "Well, not to be so hard on myself, and that all my feelings are okay." And I went, "All right."
Wow. Nice. Nice. Yeah. I think if they make a third movie, what I what I would love is if they could pull out this self, which is this the seeing, the eye that sees, or the awareness that sees the experience that we're having. Right?
Mhm,
It's the part of us that can become aware that we're aware.
mhm,
And um I think that these attitudes towards our experience, like compassion, um, love, is part of the seeing eye, is part of the awareness.
mhm,
Because the awareness is infused by an energy that empowers us to look at our experience more broadly or
mhm,
differently, or with
mhm,
differing perspectives, whether it's someone else on the other side of a conflict or someone in our family. And so my hope is that as people watch this movie, that similar to your grandson, that they can have an experience that they're whatever they experience is acceptable. They might not like it, but it's
mhm,
acceptable. And that there's, especially in the negative experiences, when you're having a positive experience, it's basically your brain saying you're on the right track. But when you
mhm,
have a negative experience, it's saying there's a problem to be solved or something to be learned here. Pay attention. So the initial action of denial is like a missed opportunity. But
mhm,
if we could see, oh, here's a learning opportunity, I've really stepped in it,
mhm,
and I can have the resilience and the self love and the self connection to say, let me be curious,
mhm,
then we can get smarter, quicker,
mhm,
and stay whole throughout that experience.
mhm,
Because, and I think that resilience in being able to say, to accept the emotions and to respond to the emotions as quickly as possible with that curiosity would create a lot of psychological resilience and strength. So that's my hope.
Richard Schwartz would say two of the main qualities of the self are compassion and curiosity. And you've just named them both.
Mm-hmm.
That's been
Right.
very helpful. And I would say wisdom. I mean, when I work with people and their parts begin to come in to an integrated place and harmony with each other, the wisdom that emerges is just mind-boggling to me. And I would,
Yeah.
people come and say, "Well, this is my problem. Can you help me solve it?" And I say to myself, I can help you create the atmosphere or the context where your wisdom will emerge. And I
Yeah.
am always so honored and in awe of that wisdom because it's never anything that I thought of.
Yeah.
It's in
Yeah.
there.
It's there.
It just,
Yeah.
oh,
It's there. It's there.
and it has
It's
perspective in a much broader perspective than our parts do.
yeah. 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 And I think wisdom is one of the resources of the self that's different than emotion.
Yeah.
Emotion is like the content, and then the you know there's different ways of depicting it. Like there's aspects of a cell that are part of the cell that are the material that allow for the cell to regenerate. But then there's the nucleus of the cell, which is giving direction. And so that intelligence, um, I would think, in terms of the self, is the resource of the self is something like wisdom. It's our ability to be aware. It's our ability to trust. It's our ability to love. It's our
Mhm.
ability to make choices. So there's many resources of the self, but I think some of those are some of the primary ones. And when we're connected to ourselves and connected to ourselves resources, we're not fixated on whatever the emotional experience is, but we're using those as jumping off points to be curious and to be compassionate and to look and taking care, taking care of our emotions. I said to a young client yesterday, I said something about digesting our emotions, and she looked at me like, digesting? What do you mean by digesting? That sounds gross. And I explained that yeah, I think emotions, just like our food goes through a transformational process after we eat it, our
Mm,
emotions can go through similar transformation, that we need to put it through this journey inside of
mm,
us, just
mm,
like food goes through a journey inside of us,
mm.
um, and is utilized for its energy, and that's which is not utilized is discarded. And same thing with emotions. And it's the trust that there are things to be digested in our emotional experiences. So,
The Virginia Satir always used to say, feelings give us our juice.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
the
was
juice of
struck
our
by the
life.
way it's so beautiful what you've said. One of the things that you said just a moment ago, I wanted to comment on too, Tim, was you said talk about resources. And I thought it was so clever in the movie that they had this character named Pouchy. And when Patsy's, oh
Oh
my
yeah,
God,
yeah, yeah.
and Anger says, okay, we gotta call on Pouchy. I really don't want to, but we've got to. And Pouchy says, well, we got duct tape, and he pulls out all these things, which was uh, concrete, but I think it was a pretty important message that there are all those resources
Yeah,
in there.
yeah. That's cool. That's yeah, that's a really neat. Yeah, and Pouchy, just as a reminder, there's a character from from Riley's childhood that's, I guess, put off into the corner, and it's kind of like a Dora the Explorer or a Blue's Clue type character. It's inspired by that kind of kids show.
Oh,
And this
Bloopy, something like that.
Loopy, yeah, I don't know. And so this floating pouch, which has all kinds of resources. Yeah, I think that's it. The emotions call upon a higher
Mhm,
sort of perspective, a
mhm.
higher resource, to help them out. So yeah, fascinating stuff. So how is this conversation for you, Sharon? Maybe we could just start to close it off, and
Oh,
yeah, just curious about how this was for you and
I'm
any final
just
thoughts you
delighted.
have.
I always love talking to you. I learned, you know, your differentiation of self from sense of self was so beautiful and I think so right on. So thank you for that. And I hope if there are people who listen and go see the movie and then, maybe listen again because I have a colleague who is PhD in psychology, is therapist, who's watched it 5 times. There's a lot in this movie.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. That's what I found. Like just watching it again today, like pausing and just thinking about.
Yeah.
Um, so it's definitely a fun movie for everyone, and then maybe
Mhm.
fun in a particularly um, academic way for
Mhm.
psychology types. So
Yes.
thank you for taking the time,
You're welcome. My
and
privilege.
yeah, until next time, um, and thanks to all for watching.